Welcome to the second ALN Thursday at 4. Thank you all for being here on this August 6th, 2020. I'm Nick Kanoki, the producer of ALN Thursday at 4, where every Thursday at 4 p.m. Eastern, we put a light on important and relevant asset leadership and asset management topics. One note before I introduce today's host, you may notice that your video and audio are muted by default in Zoom webinars. So if you'd like to say something, either write it in the chat or wait for the open Q&A at the end. And now, without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce Jim Dieter and Art Wingrove.
Yes, I'm Jim Dieter. Hello, everybody. Glad to have you with us today. These are our ALN member organizations, but thank you, everybody that's joining us today or that watch this going forward. I'm Jim Dieter, CEO of the Asset Leadership Network. I'm in Northern Virginia, Vienna, Virginia today. I don't know if Nick mentioned, but he's in Lander, Wyoming. I have his, and there's his background. There it is. Yeah, I have as my background today one of my favorite photographs I took in Ireland because in honor of Ark. So maybe this might be my favorite photograph printed out. I print big photographs. Anyhow. So we're really pleased to have with us today Art Wingrove. Art and I have known each other for some time, have been colleagues at the IAM and attended an IAM conference that Art was the responsible for, was the lead. And we have worked together as consultants along the way. We always had lots to talk about, so I thought he'd be a great guest. And Ark is, if you saw the most recent newsletter, the ALN newsletter, Ark is our newest senior fellow, and we're happy to have him, and it's a great opportunity. So without further ado, Ark, where are you today?
So I'm split. I'm currently in Brighton in the UK, so it's 9 o'clock here. And I'm back in the UK, but my picture behind me, I'm fortunate enough to have a house in just north of Cape Town. So my picture is from near myself and my wife. My wife's from South Africa. So my picture's from that house, which I'm missing at the moment, lockdown here in the UK.
Nice, nice. So when we start these chats, we've been sharing a little bit of personal information, which is often very different than our work information. But Ark, I think Ark's work and his personal information are about the same. Why don't you tell us about your blog? That's quite interesting.
So I left sort of consultancy about a couple of years ago to form my own little consultancy company. And one of the reasons I did that was I wanted to start a blog about asset management and a blog that asked questions. So it's called The Wandering Asset Manager, Wandering WA, Wandering WO. So I risk between the two of those. And the blog is to ask questions and to say, well, nobody has all of the answers, not even the consultants out there. So what about? What do we think about? And where in the world are they doing this well? And that's part of the reason why I wanted to join the ALN. I'm very pleased to be a senior fellow. Is I'm looking to find out how things work in different parts of the world and say, well, is there something from here that transfers from here? And that's very much what I want to bring to the ALN as well as get from it. So Wandering Asset Manager, please do check it out. You can comment or reply back to me. Or if anyone wants to guest blog, it's not just me. We have guest bloggers on there as well. So if somebody's got a subject that they want to put on there, then please do.
Cool. So in checking out your blog again recently, preparing for this, you had the one that really caught my eye was, well, the most. They all looked interesting. Was about stakeholder capitalism. That's that's really relevant to asset management, ISO 55000 approach. Could you tell us a little bit about what your thinking is along that and what it's about?
I'm thinking that stakeholder capitalism is something which is kind of it's been hidden behind lots of other things that have been going on in the world this year. But stakeholder capitalism really has come from the World Economic Forum, Davos man, and hopefully now Davos woman as well, looking at capitalism since the 1980s and saying, well, we need to do something to balance this business about stakeholder primacy. And the reason why I think this is key for asset management is a lot of asset owning organizations that are shareholder owned probably have this challenge of how to reconcile things like shareholder value and shareholder primacy with other things, intangibles such as the environment, sustainability, and all of these things. And I think although stakeholder capitalism wasn't conceived purely for asset management, it's come from Davos and the American, I think it's the American Chamber of Commerce and the British Chamber of Commerce and the World Economic Council. I think it offers something for asset management, and particularly organizations in that shareholder situation that I think we've struggled with since the 80s, since the principle of shareholder primacy.
Quite interesting. It's it's very good, and there's some really interesting links in there. Milton Friedman hasn't been a personal favorite of mine, but Art found a quote. What was the quote from Milton Friedman about?
Milton Friedman said that when there's opportunity in society is times of big change, and the things that get brought to the fore are often things that, as he puts it, is laying around at the time. So when there are ideas that are laying around at the time, they're often what you select from in times of great change.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of that theory, and it's the Nicholas Tazim, the Black Swan book.
Oh, Taleb, yes.
It ties actually back to some of my college work on the central limit theorem. I did a paper on, but the idea of these really rare events, and that we can, as we're trying to do something like asset management, get people more cognizant of asset management and the possibility and just how big a deal it can be to organizations, that change can be so incremental and in such small steps until it isn't, until it's whoosh. And well, clearly we're in one of those times of great change. So
there's
maybe
there's a famous quote, never waste a good crisis. And I'm not sure whose it is. Somebody may well inform us, but never waste a good crisis. That opportunity for unfreeze and refreeze change.
Yeah, that's maybe there's nothing more important to what we do than that concept, maybe. So when we put an article, little blurb about you in our newsletter this week, we just sort of used American vernacular and said you were working for the Irish government, and you went, no. And what was the term that you used?
It's a semi-state, which isn't anything to do with matter, but in Ireland and in a few countries, they have this concept of an organization which is not the state, but it's owned by the state. So the organization I worked for was AVEA, which looked after gas and water. And that was a company, an organization with profit and loss, but it was solely owned by the government. And that's actually, I think, a good solution to not having too much political interference, but equally giving some guidance. And again, this links back to difference between stakeholder organizations and owner organizations. So the concept of semi-state, Indonesia has the same with their power and their critical infrastructure, and Malaysia as well.
Yeah, that reminds me of Doug Detter. And he was a speaker at the National Academy of Sciences at our event 4 years ago, I think, 4 or 5 years ago. But he has a book that is all about assets and how assets around the world. He quotes a number of something like $177 trillion worth of assets, state-owned assets around the world. And there's really hardly any coherent national strategies to manage those assets. And one of the things he recommends is some mechanism to set aside assets and get them, decide which ones you want to have privatized and which ones you want to be public, and but then put a kind of a fence around them and hire people to manage them that actually know something about it. So that sounds in that direction.
If I can chip in there, because I've lived my life through this in the UK. In the 1980s, we had the Thatcher government, which had an ideology of privatisation, and it worked for some asset classes and it didn't work for others. And I have an opinion on it. It worked well for gas and it worked well for power and power generation, but it didn't work well for water because of the nature of those different things. And it hasn't worked well for instance, the rail network because it's fragmented it. So I think ideology is sometimes the enemy of good practice asset management, because you should look at the asset and say, what is the right ownership? Is it state, semi-state, privately owned, or PPP, PFI, which I think known as P3 or 3P, which I think offers a lot in some of these circumstances, and I know it's getting more popular around the world, ironically, as it gets less popular here because of the early mistakes.
So I know you've worked in a number of different countries. You see that ownership approaches play out differently in each country, or are there similarities? Or
I think there are similarities between, I think ownership has a lot to do with the culture that you get. If you think about state-owned assets and almost the old, people would join, and they'd join as an apprentice and they'd be with the organization, and there'd really be this word stewardship, which I think is a very positive word as far as asset management is concerned. So I think the ownership status almost gives that culture, and then that culture really drives the asset management. It's hard for the asset management to drive against that culture. So I think if you go into state-owned or semi-state, you can feel that there's a different culture created by that. It gives the space to say, well, we're going to do the right thing, as opposed to it's the bottom line, it's the bottom line. So I think there's that. Also, the different culture of different countries then feeds into asset management very interestingly. So Southeast Asia, it's a lot about compliance. So they're very highly, when you go and audit there, it's very hard actually to pick things up that are non-compliant because they're very good at doing compliance. So I think there's two aspects in there.
Yeah. One of the things that I think is, as soon as we get out of a fairly small circle of asset management people, I mean, other people we deal with, but when you're trying to explain it to others, and to me the breakthrough concept, the big concept of ISO 55000, is that asset is is defined as something that provides value, rather than something that you own or acquire in a particular way. And it's just such a huge difference. Do you see that playing differently in different countries and their understanding of asset and capital asset?
Yes, I think the challenge everywhere is that difference between cost and profit and value. And I think, to be more specific, the challenge isn't saying, well, this is how we link health and well-being to value, but this is how we actually walk the talk when it comes down to making two decisions. When you come down to that decision where purely financially it's A, but if you look at that value, it's B, that's the point where the rubber hits the road. That's the point where the organization either means it or not. So I think that's the challenge, and I don't see anyone particularly good at that. I think the Australians have probably done a lot with their fair value accounting, but it's kind of reached a point where it hasn't got through into the boardroom yet. They've not made that break, and this is where stakeholder capitalism could come in as well. But we need to be ready to explain what it means in the detail to the people who have had the ideas. So I think it's going to be an interesting time over the next few years. The other disappointments, ISO 55011, the government, or the intended standard or guidance for policy for government in asset management, not really making it through to the end tape. And I know, Jim, you know more about the trials and tribulations of publishing ISOs than me. And it's quite a disappointment that didn't actually make its way through to the finish line.
Yeah, there's a long story there. But
I know there normally
there's been a lot of good words written for that document, but nothing that so far that's gotten to the point where people could reach agreement on it. And I think, I think there's a part of it that's maybe we really don't understand what's different generically in a way that translates across cultures and countries and political systems. What's different between private industry and government? I'm not sure we understand that. You did get into it a little bit. Yeah, interestingly, back to your blog on the stakeholder capitalism. It's what I took from it is, well, there's this point of view that it's stakeholder capitalism that private enterprises should more engage stakeholders and not just shareholders. But that, and I think it's almost a verbatim quote, is the government should already be working like that. So how does that change things, and does that, going to a stakeholder capitalism, do you think that'll make less distinction between government and private in the way assets are considered and managed?
I think it should, but the cynic in me says that with the stakeholder capitalism, that unless it is somehow mandated or signed up to, it'll actually provide a disincentive to do it, because the organizations that consider those intangibles might put themselves at a competitive disadvantage. So I think at the moment within it, my balance is feeling that it's a good idea. It might lead to another conversation, but it's not strong enough. It's not being pushed strongly enough or taken up strongly enough to flip it into that. And about my, governments should be working like that. That was definitely a bit of tongue-in-cheek irony that governments haven't figured that out fully yet anyway. And I guess if the shareholder is the thing pulling you in maybe the wrong direction in the private sector, the politics is probably doing the same in the public sector.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah. So one of the things people always ask me about, and I think ask all of us, I know the US tag for ISO 55000 is working on it. One of our old colleagues, Rob Raines, I think is leading that effort, the US tag. But looking for case studies, success stories. I sometimes explain it as the late adopters, we're at the early adopter phase still. And the late adopters, want a rock solid business case that's like taking money to the bank. And early adopters see promise and act on it. But I know you've worked in a number of interesting environments. Do you have any notable success stories that you could share?
There's a good couple, and they tend to have things in common, which I think we'll come back to, which I think is the end point. I mean, my favorite one is Gas Networks Ireland, formerly Bord Gosh, and Bord Gosh means the gas board in Irish. Now Gas Networks Ireland, and I first came across them in 2013, and I think fair to say they were a good organisation then for a number of sound reasons. They had very good succession strategy of moving people around through the organisation. So they, somebody would be in operations, then they'd be in safety, and somebody else would move from safety, into maintenance, into strategy. So they were a good organisation anyway, and they saw asset management as a good way of starting to bring these things together. They saw a need for it, and they went to PAS 55. And during their program to get PAS 55, the ISO was launched. So they swapped at the last minute and got ISO in 2015. And then since then, they've had a couple of improvement programs. And I guess the reasons why I think they are so good is because they had a good culture to start with, moving people around and very long-term planning. Also, I think they undertook continual improvement. And I think transformational change is a buzzword. A lot of people are selling transformational change. We'll transform your business. And I think when you get to a certain level of maturity above, for instance, ISO 55000, transformational change actually doesn't get you that much more. And this is just my opinion, and I'm really interested in stories to the contrary or arguments to the contrary. I think you get to a certain point and the transformation actually provides more disruption than it does improvement. And you end up just changing things around and not getting any improvement. I think there's a point where the organization's got to look at itself, and it's got to be competent to look at itself and then analyze what it sees and say, we need to make a change now. Good is not good enough. We want to get better. We want to get great. And I think one of the things about GNI, and also one of their problems, is they never admit that they're really good at something. So I have trouble actually saying, you're really good at this. But that drives them to say, well, we want to get a little bit better. And their means of getting better is to do management review in the proper management system sense and get better. The last thing that they're doing now is integrating management systems. So 9,000 for quality, 14,000 for environment, 50,000 for energy, and 45,000 for safety, and 55 for asset management. So they're looking to integrate those management systems and gain efficiencies out of bringing groups together and making those connections. And I think they're going to do it well. I think that's one of the next frontiers, is asset management not looking in on itself, but actually looking out and integrating further.
Yeah, it's interesting about the ISO management system standards. People that aren't involved in the development might not be aware, but much of the text in all of those documents is exactly the same, because it's mandated by the quality people who kind of own that management system standard system. And it's all good, but I sometimes wonder if they're not shooting themselves in the foot by making every standard a quality standard. You know, if you took the quality statements out of ISO 55001, it's much easier to understand. If you said you need a quality system, rather than saying you need to document that 24 different times, that it would be easier for people to see. It's really about having a plan and using some of these fundamentals that are mentioned in 55,000 and making it happen. And if you don't have a quality system, you got a long way to go.
Can I be provocative and actually say that there's a flip side of this, that if you did ISO 9000 right and you had your objectives correct, would you need any of the other of the management systems? And a few people have asked me this, could you do it all with 9000 if one of your objectives was doing good asset management? And that's a really provocative question.
Yeah, no, that's good. I know of one example of that, Ramesh Gulati, who is a member of the US TAG, has been a delegate to several of the international meetings, works with the Air Force, I believe, in Tennessee, I think. And that's what they've done. When they started the development, his point of view was, well, we're already doing this, and we use 9001 to do it. And it brought a lot of insight to the question. Interesting. So, Art, you're going to be a senior fellow. So, any ideas of what you'd like to bring to the table, or how can we help, or anything like that?
So I think I can help with all the normal things, like I've helped write SAMPs and all of these things. But I think what I'd like to offer up mainly is do you want 3 or 4 different versions of how this has happened before somewhere else? So I think the main thing I'd like to offer is if you think that there may be other ways of doing this, I'd definitely like to offer the services of saying, well, actually there are 2 or 3, and I'll probably have some backup information from those organizations or contacts. So that's one of the things I'd like to bring. I'm doing a lot recently in the water sector. So I'm really coming home. I started off in the water sector, at the beginning of my career, and went via nuclear, rail, and a load of others. But I'm coming back to water now on waterways. So if there's anything in the water sector in particular to offer. So it's probably those 2 things that I can offer the ALN, and are looking for, the way you're developing things and what you're looking at.
Yeah, I mean, we are about what our members can do and can make happen, and how we can help and support each other. That's good.
Okay, guys. Well, we are at that Q&A section of the chat, and we had one question. Ark, what do you think will happen when organizations align multiple standards?
Ooh. I'd like to say lots will happen, but it will probably be just the people who are management system geeks. I have a saying that you can't sell management systems. You can try, but I've never managed it. You can sell the benefits of it. I think when they align, people will go, oh, isn't that brilliant? This plan is for safety and for asset management. Isn't this wonderful? Look, that happened. And people like us who've been working on it for years will kind of go, oh, goodness. But that's the best that we can hope for is we look at that and we go, that was a good day's work. Let's go have a drink and celebrate. So I think when they align, it won't be some big bang or something like that. I just think organizations will work better and people will go, oh yes, that aligns. I'm now in one meeting and there are two things covered and things are better. So I don't see it as a big bang, but I see there are a lot of benefit in it. But it will be very hard to prove that benefit, and almost you need to start off with, how are we going to show that we did a good job?
Gotcha. Well, thank you so much, Ark, for being here, and thank you everyone for tuning in. To continue the conversation, please feel free to reach out to any of us personally or email webinar@assetleadership.net. And before I forget, since we didn't put this at the beginning, I'd like to share our slides.
Oh, there it is.
With of our members here at ALN.
Great.
And again, our production team. And yeah, thank you all for coming. You especially, Ark.
Thank you very much.
Until next time.
Thanks.